When French President Emmanuel Macron stood before a crowded press room in Paris and labeled Thomas Sankara a dangerous radical, he had no idea that within hours the world would be hanging on Sankara's every word, and Macron himself would be left speechless. The press conference, intended to reaffirm France's geopolitical strategy in West Africa, took a shocking turn when Macron deviated from the script, responding to a journalist's question with a statement that would ignite a global firestorm. "Men like Thomas Sankara are not visionaries," Macron said, his tone sharp. "They are dangerous radicals. The kind of radicalism that threatens the stability of an entire region." The words hung heavy in the air. The room, once filled with the murmur of typing and camera clicks, fell silent. Within minutes, the quote began trending worldwide. But what the world didn't know, and what would soon become the story of the century, was that Thomas Sankara, long thought dead since 1987, was alive. 2 weeks before Macron's explosive statement, in a secured facility in Ouagadougou, a clandestine scientific breakthrough had shocked a circle of African leaders. A team of bioengineers, working in secret with rogue Soviet-era data and underground African tech cooperatives, had achieved the impossible, the revival of Thomas Sankara. Brought back with full cognitive function, enhanced by modern knowledge, Sankara emerged not as a relic of the past, but as a visionary reborn, one who understood both the colonial legacy and the digital age. Sankara had been silent since his return, observing, studying, preparing. Macron's provocation forced his hand. From a modest studio in Burkina Faso, Sankara addressed the world. Dressed in his iconic red military jacket, he stood before a single camera, no music, no effects, only his voice. "Dangerous? Perhaps," he said calmly, his gaze unwavering, "but only to those who built their empires on our silence." The video spread like wildfire. Within 15 minutes, it had amassed 20 million views. His statement wasn't just a rebuttal, it was a declaration. Macron attempted to respond with a second press briefing, but Sankara had already released a multilingual manifesto, published in French, English, Arabic, and several African dialects, detailing the economic exploitation of Francophone Africa. With charts, data, and historic records, the manifesto accused France of manipulating African economies through currency control, military interventions, and educational indoctrination. Sankara's words were surgical. "You colonized our bodies. Then you colonized our minds. Now, you fear we might reclaim both." As the manifesto circulated, Sankara was invited to speak at a special session of the United Nations. Macron, under international pressure, agreed to attend. The world watched as both men entered the General Assembly chamber. Macron's speech was eloquent, polished, full of diplomatic nuance. He spoke of progress, cooperation, and mutual respect. But when Sankara took the floor, silence fell once again. He did not shout. He did not accuse with anger. He simply told the truth. "I am not here to condemn. I am here to remind. If demanding dignity is radical, then let us be dangerously dignified." The room erupted in applause. Macron remained still. In the days that followed, Sankara's team released a cache of declassified documents, many leaked by former French intelligence operatives, proving France's involvement in the 1987 coup that led to his assassination.
The documents showed that French officials considered Sankara's economic independence and anti-imperialist rhetoric a threat to strategic interests. Macron, now facing domestic and international backlash, delivered a carefully worded apology, calling past policies errors of judgment. Sankara responded once more. The problem is not that history happened. The problem is pretending it didn't shape the present. All across Africa, students marched peacefully, quoting Sankara, demanding the end of neo-colonial military bases, the reform of educational systems, and the return of cultural artifacts. From Dakar to Nairobi, murals of Sankara appeared overnight. He had become more than a man. He was now a movement. In Ghana, youth-led collectives began dismantling abandoned colonial monuments. In South Africa, university students demanded curriculum reforms to include Pan-African history, naming Sankara alongside Biko and Lumumba. In Senegal, hip-hop artists released tracks sampling his speeches, turning his legacy into lyrical resistance. France, once a dominant force on the continent, faced a diplomatic reckoning. Leaders of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso met without French presence for the first time in decades. They signed a regional pact for economic sovereignty, backed by gold reserves and digital currencies developed internally. Meanwhile, Sankara launched a weekly podcast from Ouagadougou, where he calmly analyzed global events, connected them to Africa's struggles, and offered insight on climate, equity, and justice. It became the most downloaded podcast in Africa within 3 weeks. In a final symbolic act, Sankara accepted an invitation to speak before the French Senate. Macron declined to attend. The speech, broadcast live in over 60 countries, was a masterclass in restraint and righteousness. France called me a radical, but who drew the borders that divide brothers? Who took our diamonds and gave us debt? If truth is radical, then let it shine. As he exited the Senate, crowds gathered outside, not in protest, but in silence. A silence deeper than any shout. Macron, in a brief video, said only, "I have no response. I am listening." The world changed. African nations began re-evaluating military treaties. Trade agreements were rewritten. Youth movements surged. And in Ouagadougou, a child opened a notebook to begin class. On the cover was a picture of Sankara and the words, "While others built empires, we built people. Now the people rise." And thus history turned a page, not with a bang, but with the calm voice of a man once silenced, now heard by millions. The story of Sankara's return was no longer just a moment of reckoning for France. It was a mirror held up to the entire world, reminding it that justice delayed is not justice denied, and that the power of truth, even whispered, can silence the mighty.